You know that feeling when your world stops for a moment? When time seems to freeze and you can't quite make sense of what you're seeing? That's how I felt that Tuesday afternoon in November when I got the call from my bank. My name is Estelle. I'm 69 years old, and I've spent most of my life doing the thing I love most, working in schools as a librarian, helping young people discover the worlds hidden in books. Retirement came 3 years ago, and I thought I'd finally earned the right to peace and quiet. I was wrong about how much peace was waiting for me. The voice on the phone was professional but strained. Ms. Chen, we're calling because we've detected unusual activity on your account. Unusual activity. That's how they say it. Like it's just an inconvenience. Like someone didn't just take nearly everything I'd spent a lifetime building. I sat down at my kitchen table, my hands shaking as I listened. My savings account, the one I'd carefully deposited into for decades, was down to $8. 8. A modest coffee and a pastry would have emptied it. But that wasn't the worst part. The college fund I'd been building for my grandson Jackson since he was born, $47,000. 12 years of careful planning and sacrifice. Gone. Completely gone. I remember the banker asking if I'd authorized a series of wire transfers. Wire transfers. Plural. Multiple times. To accounts I'd never heard of, in names I didn't recognize. I couldn't even speak. I just kept saying, no, I would never. When I hung up, I did what I always do when I'm scared. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called for Jackson. He came down from his bedroom, 13 years old, lanky in that way teenagers are, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's smile. That smile. God, how I've held on to that smile over the years. He lost his mother when he was just 2, a car accident, sudden and senseless. I became not just his grandmother, but his whole world, and he became mine. Honey, something's happened, I told him. Something bad. The color drained from his face. He was probably thinking the same thing I was. Another tragedy, another loss. But this was different. This was worse in a way I couldn't have imagined, because this came from family. I told him about the accounts, the missing money, all of it. And as the words came out, I realized what they meant. His college fund, the future I'd spent every spare dollar protecting. It was stolen. Grandma, Jackson said quietly. Who did it? That was when it hit me. My son Derek. Had to be. Derek, who'd gradually faded from our lives over the past few years. Derek, who used to call every Sunday and then just didn't anymore. Derek, who I'd made excuses for, who I'd told Jackson was just going through a phase, that he still loved us, even if he didn't show it. There had been a woman, Paula Simmons, a financial planner, or so she said, who Derek had introduced us to at a coffee shop about 8 months earlier. She was charming and professional, always asking about my retirement plans, my investments, whether I'd considered moving my assets around. I remembered thinking it was nice that Derek was trying to help, that maybe this woman was a good influence, dragging him back toward responsibility. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have said no when Derek started asking me for passwords. I should have asked more questions when he said he wanted to help me optimize my accounts. Instead, I gave him my passwords. Not all of them, just the important ones. And Derek, in his careless way, used the same password for everything. My late wife Sarah's name, followed by the year we were married. I didn't know any of this yet, of course, but Jackson did. After I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that will stay with me forever. "Don't worry yet, Grandma. Let me check something." He went back upstairs. I heard the soft click of his keyboard, that sound that's become the background music of his teenage years. Click, click, click. I sat at the kitchen table, feeling old and stupid and violated, while my grandson did something I didn't understand. An hour later, Jackson came downstairs with his laptop. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was steady in a way that made him sound older than 13. "I've been monitoring Dad's accounts for a while now." I stared at him. "You've been what?" "He's been acting weird," Jackson said, sitting down across from me. "Secretive. And you mentioned once that he'd asked for your passwords. So I learned how to look at things. Not illegal things, just public records, that kind of stuff." My 13-year-old grandson had been investigating his father. While I'd been grieving the loss of a son I thought I still had, Jackson had been watching, waiting, gathering information. "Look," he said, turning his laptop toward me. What I saw made my breath catch. Savings account transfers, credit cards opened in my name. Not just one or two, 3 separate fraudulent loans, all opened in my social security number, but listing Jackson's identity. They'd aged him up on paper, made him 23 years old, someone with collateral, someone with a credit history to drain. "How long have you been looking at this?" I whispered. "Since August," Jackson said. "About 3 months ago. I kept hoping I was wrong, that maybe Dad just needed to borrow money and was going to pay it back. But then the amount kept growing, and I found out about Paula. She's not just a financial planner, Grandma. She's been targeting elderly clients for years." My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't just from fear. It was from the realization that my grandson, my baby, had been carrying this alone for 3 months. Jackson had filed fraud alerts. He'd documented everything, created spreadsheets that would have made an accountant weep with their precision. He'd reported Paula to the State Banking Commission, sent her employer a complete documentation file with timestamps and evidence. He'd done all of it quietly, methodically, like a small soldier building his case for war. Paula was suspended by midnight. 3 days later, Derek called. His voice was panicked, strange in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom, someone is targeting us. Someone's reporting us to the authorities. I don't know what's happening, but we need to disappear. Paula says we need to leave the country." I held the phone away from my ear as if it might burn me. "Derek," I said quietly, "I know what you did." There was silence on the other end. Then he hung up. The authorities came 2 weeks later. Derek and Paula were arrested within a month. Paula had been robbing elderly clients for years. 14 victims total. Over $350,000 stolen. My son became a footnote in her massive fraud operation. A man so desperate and so easily led that he'd been willing to betray the mother who raised him and the grandson who'd given him every chance. Paula tried to cross into Canada when she knew it was over. They caught her at the border. Jackson watched it all unfold with a strange kind of quiet. He didn't gloat or celebrate. He just helped me through the bureaucracy of recovering what we could, which wasn't much. The bank covered most of my savings, thank God. The student loan fraud was more complicated, but Jackson was there for every phone call, every form, every moment of it. Now, 18 months later, Jackson sits at our kitchen table with a spreadsheet for everything. Our groceries, our utilities, our savings again, slowly growing. He's helped me implement fraud protections I didn't even know existed. He checks on me in ways that are both protective and gentle, never making me feel small for being deceived. He's 13 years old, and he's the bravest person I know. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry at Derek. The truth is complicated. I'm angry, yes, but mostly I'm sad for the man he became, the man he chose to be, and I'm overwhelmingly grateful for the 13-year-old boy who loved me enough to watch his own father so carefully, to protect a grandmother he could have resented for all the ways our lives have been shaped by loss. When Jackson smiled at me that day and said, "Grandma, don't worry, I handled it," he wasn't being arrogant or cocky. He was being honest. He had handled it. A child had done what the adults in his life could not. And that's the story I tell now when people ask what I'm most proud of. Not my career, though I loved that work. Not any accomplishment of my own. I'm most proud of a 13-year-old boy who decided that his grandmother was worth protecting, that justice was worth pursuing, and that some things are too important to let go. That's the story of how my grandson saved me.